today for us. That includes Liz Adir and Bori Chele, some of whom you might have known through registration. Bori is currently finishing up her PhD at University of Minnesota, soon to leave for Oregon State. Woohoo! And Liz is at California State University, Monterey Bay. So they are our registration wranglers and our Zoom wizards. They will be taking us in and out of breakouts today. I also want to give a shout out to Chris Reyna, who is currently an assistant professor on the cusp of tenure at Virginia Commonwealth University. He is going to be monitoring our chat today. So if you have technical difficulties, questions, concerns, please shoot those over to Chris and put them in the chat. For some guidance on how today is going to go, I am shortly going to turn the stage over to our presenters and allow them to introduce themselves. A few reminders for us, some housekeeping. So we do intend that this is a very active and engaged conversation. As such, we would encourage you very much to leave your videos on so that we can see each other. We would also encourage you that if you have not done so already, please change your name on your Zoom to your preferred name, or what you'd like to be called during the discussion. There will be a couple of opportunities for breakouts. So we are going to start with a quick panel conversation, lightning panel, with each of our authors. And then we are sending everyone into a breakout room with one of the authors for more in-depth and detailed conversation. We will come back from those breakouts, give the authors another chance to speak, and then we will send everyone back into a second breakout. You'll be with a different author and have another opportunity to ask questions and really get to know these authors and their work. We'll bring it back for a little bit of quick feedback and a final panel conversation with our speakers. So since we have a very tight agenda today, I will hesitate no longer and turn it right over to our speakers. So if we could please start with Wren, give us just who you are, and we are going to answer the question, how has this paper shaped your research identity?
Hi everyone, thanks for having me. My name is Wren Montgomery. I'm an assistant professor in the Sustainability and General Management groups at the Ivy Business School and also a faculty affiliate at the Urban Institute at the University of Michigan. Well, this was my dissertation work, so I don't think it shapes things more than that. It was fairly formative. But just to give you, a little story, I remember going into academy in my first few years when I became interested in water issues and the water crisis. I'm obviously interested in environmental sustainability more broadly, but found this was a really understudied issue. And I'd mention it to people and they'd stare at me blankly, like, why would you be interested in water? This seemed, and I will mention Mike, I think was one of the few people who was like, that's cool. So yay, Mike. Anyway, but I went from that to, and obviously there's a big social justice piece to my work as well. So I went from people going, what the heck are you doing, to winning some awards. So it's been really formative and I really appreciate the growing support for work like this. So thank you.
Wren, could we maybe go to Trent next, please?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Glad to be here with you today. The work that Dean and I have is a book, so it's a lot of material. This material focuses on post-crisis organizing, which is similar to what Wren said when I first started doing this with Dean during my early dissertation days. Everybody thought we were crazy. Now everyone's saying, why aren't we all doing disaster research? So it's been fascinating for us to go on that journey, and we share a number of our studies in the book, and it's really shaped a lot of the research areas we explore, both on the notion of spontaneous venturing, different types of emergent organizations, as well as organizing compassion, and how it can sometimes be effective and then also sometimes have unintended consequences, which are potentially damaging to the so-called victims of a crisis, as well as to those trying to help out. So that's our kind of general overview, and it has motivated a lot of mine and Dean's subsequent research as well. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you. Dean, is there anything you'd like to add there?
No, not really. I mean, we're talking about identity, so I'm happy for my identity to be Trent's supervisor and to be his colleague. We both studied, the setting was in Australia, and I'm an Australian, and Trent's grandfather, who just turned 100, also was involved a lot in kind of dealing with crises and helping people alleviate suffering. So it really had a very personal element to the research to both of us.
Wonderful, thank you. So let's turn to our last author team. So Yanhua.
Hi, everyone. This is Yanhua Bird. I'm an assistant professor at the Management and Organization Group at Boston University. I'm still trying to get used to the title because I only became assistant professor like 3 months ago. So how did I start this project? I think, when I think I started the project the second year when I was in grad school. And at that time, I never heard of this term, research identity. So I just knew that Mike Toffel is a great professor and I should work with him. So I went to Mike's office and I said, I heard many good things about you. I like your work. I want to work with you. That's how it started. But I didn't know at the time was that this project would have very long-lasting impact on my research. As I find about this while I was looking for a job last year. This paper literally got me several flyouts. And I remember during the campus visit dinners, people were talking about this paper a lot. And you can call it imprinting or past dependence, but I'm still working on this subject. So that's that.
Thank you. Let's move on to Jodi.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Jodi Short, and I guess I'm a bit of an interloper here. I'm at UC Hastings College of the Law. So I'm teaching in a law school environment, but often writing with colleagues in a business school. And so, that has implications for my identity. So I guess what I would say about this paper is that it really solidified my identity as an organizational theorist, which was a triumph for me because my work has long touched on organizational theory, but not necessarily in the most profound or organic way. A lot of times the questions that I'm interested in are motivated from the legal side. They're questions about compliance and deterrence. And certainly there's an affinity across those issues in org theory, but it was this paper that it was really the first time that I felt like I had made a real important contribution to organizational theory.
Wonderful. And we will wrap up with Mike.
I'm learning so much about my co-authors on this call. I could just let Yanhua keep going, but that was a great ad. Thank you, Yanhua. I'm gonna make a video of you for future doctoral students. So Mike Toffel from Harvard Business School. I have multiple identities, a bit of a Rorschach test. To some, I'm an applied economist. To others, I'm a strategy scholar. And to others still, I'm an empirical operations scholar. And I sort of work on the intersection of those three areas. And depending on the paper, I have a different identity. I work a lot with organizational theorists like Jodi and Yanhua and Chris Marquis to help balance out the portfolio of the work. So, so this paper is sort of one of many that I've worked on with Jodi about working conditions in supply chains, where we started looking at institutional features. Then we took a bit of a detour and talked about the bias in assessment of supply chain from the auditor's perspective. And then we're moved into, well, how useful is this whole enterprise to predict improvements in these factories? And so we did one paper that was, again, thinking about sort of the actual audit itself and whether it's a surprise and who the auditors are. And then this paper was looking at organizational features, whether they're unionized, whether they use piece rate pay as a marker to predict improvement. So it's along my journey of sort of this working conditions supply chain, influenced by some of my friends who are doing more work on machine learning, which is much more about predicting than explaining, but grounded in organizational theory, thanks to Yanhua and Jodi, to sort of help us come up with a framing that explains why we see what we're seeing in the empirics. So that's a little bit about how it fits into my persona.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So now that we've gotten a little taste of what our authors have to offer, we are going to jump into breakout sessions. However, before we do that, I need to mention one more person whom I forgot in my haste to get us started today, and that is Ann Sui. She is our sage and our guidance in this process. She has been our connection to RRBM. She's a co-founder, and really without her, this would not be possible. So big thanks to Ann, who is also joining us today. So without further ado, into breakout rooms you go, and we will meet you all back here in about 15 minutes. Like mine, it was quick. We did not get to all of our points, but not to worry, we have another breakout session coming up. Were there any main takeaways or anything that came up from our groups that we'd like to share with the broader collective? Let's give folks a second to shout out here. If not, then let's just go ahead and jump into our next lightning panel. So our second question for the authors is, what's really the primary learning point of your paper? So let's just go in the same order that we had previously. So Wren, we'll let you take the floor first.
There, sorry, something else popped up in front of me. So gosh, yeah, I sped my last one because of your word lightning, Melissa. I was super fast. So yeah, the primary learning point, I think this actually dovetails to what I sort of would have said in the first part too. I mean, I think it's this intersection. I, like, you know, many people in some of these communities, ARCs and O&E and things, have been very interested in environmental sustainability. And I think there's not enough about, you know, the intersection of social and environmental issues. And certainly now, as we're starting to hear so much more about racial justice, social justice, environmental justice. I think, is that happening on my, anyway?
I think we just have a little feedback. So if everyone can just double check their mics, that would be great. And Wren, back to you.
Okay, no worries. So I think, I mean, in my mind, one of the things this paper does is sort of link those two and see, you know, water crises and how based in you know, people's real experiences they are, kind of, you know, looking at really micro level experiences that help us, I think, as a touch point or to explain, to really connect with some of these big things that seem very abstract, like the climate crisis and water crises. So I think that connection is really important. The other piece that kind of came out of it almost a little bit later on, I think, is this institutional decay piece. So it's talking about water services being very taken for granted. If we take something too much for granted, we kind of forget about it and stop protecting it or working actively on it. And I think we've really seen that with democracy. I mean, certainly the last month or so, and more in the US and elsewhere, but also some of the very micro level work that people have been doing to protect it, to get people out to the polls, to watch polls, to do things like that. And I think it's a very similar story to what is in our paper. So I think that institutional decay, but then what's needed for institutional renewal and protection is really important. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you so much. We're going to turn it over to Trent to talk a little bit about their paper.
Yeah, I would say the single biggest learning from my perspective was to be really careful about how we evaluate the people that our initiatives and efforts are trying to help. We ended up calling a lot of our, the phenomenon that we were exploring, victim-led organizing or victim-led venturing. And so really the biggest observation was, wow, look at these individuals who experienced incredible trauma and loss, and yet they were the best positioned to be making decisions about effective solutions. And so it's a bit dangerous for us to come in from the outside and say, let me tell you what you need. And in fact, whereas those who are on the ground, they have the local connections, the local knowledge, they have networks, they understand how things work, how relationships work, and are going to be the most effective in terms of actually deploying individuals for an organizational effort. So for me, just minding how we address victims.
Thank you. And we're actually going to go to our third author team. Yanhua, we'll start with you.
Thanks. So I think for this paper, I was just discussing this in a breakout room. So I think the biggest part theoretically for the paper is decoupling. So this idea of decoupling, I think it's something that we're very familiar with for organizational theorists, and we're always talking about organization structure or policy decoupled from organizational practice. But the idea of decoupling also evolved over time. These days, people are talking more about the decoupling of means and ends. And that is wide. So Jodi and I went back and forth on this multiple times, and we were thinking maybe the hook for our paper would be the second type of decoupling, and also to what extent the decoupling will be reduced in some situations when organizational structural situations would be different from other organizational structural situations. So that's where we start with the paper. That's also the most interesting part for me in terms of writing this paper. Jodi, do you want to add to this?
Sure, yeah. So I mean, in a similar vein, but I don't know, maybe just building on that a little bit. I mean, what the paper really brought to life for me was just the dynamism involved in these really entrenched notions of coupling and decoupling, and the idea that they're not binary, right? And you could have more or less coupling, and that you could actually identify structures within organizations that can serve as barriers to coupling or bridges to coupling. To me, that was a really powerful insight that I certainly hadn't gotten in quite such a clear way from previous research before.
And I learned that there was a thing called decoupling, which sounds, that was kind of interesting. And that decoupling and coupling, those are two sides of different coins. So that was new to me. Mostly what I learned about this was more, again, the empirical context, which is that you can predict which types of organizations are going to improve their working conditions more rapidly than others. And interestingly enough, some of the standards that people poo-poo, management system standards like ISO 9000, ISO 14000, that are not outcome-based, but rather process-based, it turns out if you have those standards, you improve faster. So that's illuminating a new benefit of those standards, which I thought was quite interesting. And also that unionization, which again has a lot of pros and cons and means something different in places like China, where a lot of our data is, nonetheless have, again, a different benefit than people are thinking about. It turns out unionized factories, even in China, improve their working conditions more rapidly. So I thought those findings were particularly interesting, and also learning that there's a thing called decoupling.
Thank you. So I have learned that we need just another minute or two before we send everybody into, oh, never mind. It looks like we are ready to go with breakout rooms. So get ready, get set, and we are off for another 15-minute conversation. All right, hopefully we've all found our way back here, or we'll do so shortly. So we do have one more quick panel conversation, but before we do that, we'd actually like to ask participants to take just a couple of minutes to do some feedback for us. So we know that sending this out after, you'll have a chance to forget everything you've learned here. So while we're in the moment, we have just 2 minutes. It won't take you very long. That's going to go into the chat here in just a second. We'll have a link for you. And so we'll just take a few minutes to do that, and then we'll bring it back for our last lightning panel round with our authors. Posted here in our chat, the homepage for the Responsible Research in Business and Management. So if you are interested, if you have not connected with this group yet, please do. There are many, many resources on this site and many more authors and papers who are doing exactly the same kind of work. So we encourage you to take a look at that and reach out. So I'm going to slowly get us back to our last lightning question for our author teams. So our third question here: what has been the most inspiring outcome that you have personally experienced as a result of doing this research, doing this paper, and being involved? So what has been most inspiring to you? So we'll stick with the same order. So Wren, please.
The pressure today, oh my gosh. Yeah. God, well, so many things. We're chatting the last session about just, being able to, I think even before the paper was published, and this is really important to me, is share some of the stuff, the learnings, et cetera, in the community, because I had this sort of very global view of what was happening across various actors and things like that. So I was asked to speak a lot, or just, talk to little local newspapers and things like that. And the participants, kept saying, just tell the story, just tell the story. So, being able to do that was really impactful for me. I can tell one very brief story, but I was asked to read a draft water strategy that came out of the governor's office of Michigan. And I quickly, flipped back to the table or the index, and I saw, oh, there's access in there, water access, fantastic. Because, I didn't think they'd be interested in justice. And I turned to that page, and it was, how many boat ramps are there where you can access the Great Lakes? So, I was like, what? There was nothing about affordability. So I was able to bring that up, and they added it into Michigan's water strategy about, some stuff about water justice. But anyway, that was a very, very clear one. But just to sum up, people like you who are interested in the research as well is really incredible. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Trent, we'll turn it over to you, please.
Yeah, I gotta say, I think, this early work of mine, especially doing field work and going out, when I left my job as a management consultant to pursue a PhD, I swore to myself, I said, whatever you do, like, don't disconnect from the real world, because we're researchers, and it's not like I'm researching, some theoretical concept that's 10 billion miles away. I mean, we're talking about organizations with real people in them that are out there, right? And that's what we do. And what an honor it is to be invited and into their lives and to learn about what they're doing. And so I just get so excited when I'm out in the field and I'm meeting different people. And so the most inspiring thing from this initial project is it has taught me to not be afraid to just get out there and interview different people. So lately I've been interviewing former professional athletes. I've been interviewing Amish business people in various locations all throughout, driving them out in the middle of nowhere, planning new projects. I'm always considering new projects that can just get me out of my office, well, as best as we can with COVID, I guess, get me out of my office and expose me to, what are people actually dealing with in the real world. And I just think it's so healthy for us, and my students that I teach, they love that when I tell them, oh yeah, look, I actually talk to business owners. It's an amazing thing, right? I'm a business professor and I talk to business owners. So I guess for me, the moment you get out there, if you're nervous about it, if you're nervous about, well, what if I don't have the right connections? If I don't have this, I mean, we're all there. But when you get out there, or you find a new type of data, it can really be energizing for you and launch lots of progress for your own career. So that to me has been the greatest things, the things I've learned from these individuals, and then the actions they've motivated me to do.
Wonderful. Thank you for those insights. So back to our third author team, Yanhua.
So what I learned, also something that I enjoy the most about the project is the fact is that I actually visited several factories that in our data set, and that was one of the most memorable doctoral training process in in years at Harvard. Like, this is something that I remember the most. I was able to visit those factories, actually follow the auditors and see how they produce the data. So like, we're talking about data generation process a lot in stats class. And I actually, got to the factory and look at the process. And I think it's related to what Trent just said, like actually talk to managers and talk to auditors and see how the factories are handling this. It's something that's truly valuable. So I also find like I just somehow got a huge confidence in my own data analysis once I know how the data were produced. I trust my data. I know it's true, it's real, and I'm also more confident in the R&R process when reviewers ask us, how can we trust audit data? How do we know that factories are not faking it? And I was there. I know how it's produced. So I really like, that's something that I learned so much about. And also later after that, I did my dissertation, I start new projects. I always start by interviewing people and talk to people that I'm studying, because I want to know that the data are not lying or tricking me. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Jodi, please add on to that.
Great, thanks. So I've got to say that I think that the most inspiring outcome for me personally is that this paper finally taught Mike decoupling theory, even though we've written 2 or 3 other papers using it. But I think that does speak to the sort of clarifying nature of the paper. And in the real world, one of the most inspiring outcomes for me was actually seeing some of my colleagues who are not steeped in this stuff find this idea of coupling and decoupling and the sort of the barriers and the bridges to those outcomes to be really useful in their own advocacy work. So just kind of seeing a light bulb go on for advocates, so I have a colleague who does a lot of work with companies on diversity programs. And, I think that the thinking is normally like you think about what the diversity program is and you think about what the outcomes are. But the idea for her of starting to think about, well, what's standing in between those two things, or the program and the practices, was just, she found it to be so useful. And, it's not to say that she hadn't thought about those issues at all ever before, but it helped the advocate on the ground to see things in a new light. And so that was really satisfying.
And Mike, please.
I'm going to pivot a little. So I think presenting this to practitioners, which I've done alongside Yanhua in one case, seeing their responses, seeing their energy from the findings, that's super motivating and inspiring. Trying to get these insights back into the manager's hands. Jodi and I are right now writing a short HBR piece that tries to summarize our work and others in this space. And I'm launching a new website, like a micro website for practitioners to understand, what do we know about managing working conditions in supply chains? And we're going to launch that in the new year. So all this idea of getting these insights back into managerial hands. As a researcher piece, 2 things that are great. One is as you get rolling in a space, there's this virtuous cycle. And so another company approached me with a new data set from a different perspective. This is a company as opposed to an auditor. So, and I'm working on this with Jodi and another doctoral student, trying to figure out their own auditors that they employ versus third-party auditors. And we're exploring how do those turn up different outcomes. So it's led to some new work there. And finally, just being able to watch Yanhua proceed from a second-year doctoral student to where she is now. And I'm excited. We're getting the team back together again for a very different project that Yanhua has launched and has brought to us this time. So that's another thing that's a great spillover from this project that I'm looking forward to digging into in the new year.
Thank you all so much. I think it's really nice to hear, and especially to conclude with the things that make this research really valuable, not just to the world, but also to you personally. I think especially as junior scholars, sometimes the pressures of the field can kind of get to you. And so just seeing and hearing some of these stories, I think are very encouraging in getting us to continue doing our own work and to get out there and do research that really excites us, that addresses important phenomenon, and that does in fact move the world. So a big, huge thank you to all of our presenters who were here today. We can do some virtual clapping for them. And also thank you so much to our participants. We appreciate you being here and we hope that you got as much out of it as I think we did. So we are now including our own, as the organizers, bios in the chat link. We know we didn't give ourselves much of an introduction, but if you would like to know a little bit more about us or connect with us, particularly if you are interested in being more involved and potentially helping organize this in the future, we would very much love to hear from you. But otherwise, again, thank you everyone for being here today, and that's a wrap. Thanks so much, all.
Thank you, everybody, for coming, and thanks to all the authors, and thanks to the organizers. This is entirely voluntary service for the benefit of the larger community. I think they deserve a round of applause.
Thank you, everyone.
Very well organized. Thank you, guys. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye, all.
Bye.
Thank you.